What's up? This is Rebel Radio.
What up? What up? This is DJ Newmark.
This is Peanut Butter Wolf.
It's your boy. It's okay.
Keep checking out Rebel Radio.
Rebel Radio.
This is Rebel Radio.
We're in the place right here. Rebel Radio is going down.
Would you say Rebel Radio?
Oh, wait. Let's do it again.
Rebel Radio.
What's up, Rebels? Welcome back to Rebel Radio, the weekly show where I talk to the rebels that are shaping youth culture. We find out how they do it, why they do it, and what you can do to get a little piece of the pie for yourself. We're also the only show to bring you new music every week from our friends over at EDM.com. I'm your host, Josh Levine, and my guest today, Scott Nathan, the talented photographer. Man, this guy has so many stories. He tells stories with his camera. He's got this great project called Confessional, where he's interviewed so far over 100 women. Well, he hasn't interviewed them. He puts the camera on them. Usually they're naked, and he just lets it sit there for a long period of time until all kind of stuff comes out with no words, but on screen for us to see. That's a pretty amazing thing. Scott's also got a series on Medium called Bedtime Stories for Grown-Ups. Just amazing, amazing stories. My favorite one is The Horror Whisperer, but he's got a great story about a con woman. He tells one about golfing with OJ. There's great stuff on there, and he's also going to give us some insight into how he's been able to get people to just give him stuff throughout his career and do him favors and help him get where he's going. It's pretty amazing stuff coming up from Scott Nathan right after our EDM.com track of the week.
What do I even care?
Yo, that was OCO with Pretty Liar, the EDM.com track of the week. If you like that one, get over to EDM.com. Check out more new music. And now let's get into the interview with Scott Nathan.
When you're not really there.
Well, thanks for doing this, man. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thanks. Are we rolling?
Yeah,
Okay,
we just
cool.
roll, and then James works his magic
All right, cool.
later. And so, yeah, we'll just talk. But you know, I wasn't familiar with your work until I heard from Amanda, and anything she tells me I take seriously. So
Cool.
it's cool. I'm excited to meet you. And then now I've been reading all your stuff, and just amazing, fantastic stories, and I'm excited to dig into it.
Cool.
But hearing you started into music before you got into photography, what was your early experience with music?
I mean, my earliest experience, the sort of seminal moment that changed my life when I was in 7th grade, so that would make me about 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And my dad owned like an electrical supplies, medical supplies, and a janitorial supplies company. So basically like a big warehouse forklift kind of business. And one of his clients was the Chicago Stadium where the Bulls and the Blackhawks played. So, and bands played there back then. It was this great old, they called it the old barn. It was made of wood and it had a pipe organ. It's long gone. But it was like an original 6 NHL stadium. And so my dad took me to see Kiss in '77.
Nice.
A Live 2 tour.
Wow.
And hydraulic lifts and the fire and the spitting blood. And I'm just like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. All I want to do is go to concerts.
Yeah.
So that was amazing. And then I'm like, can we do more of these? And my dad's like, yeah. So my second show was Queen.
Nice.
News of the World Tour, which was the greatest concert I've ever seen. And the second greatest concert I've ever seen is the second time I saw Queen. And I was just a huge music fan. I mean, I probably had 1,500 pieces of vinyl.
Yeah.
I went to every concert I could get my hands on. I played guitar. You know, never really played. I never really played in bands, but I'd sit in here and there. Mm-hmm. Then I went to college and I became roommates with this guy at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and he was kind of like me. He had long hair. He was from LA, and I'd never really gotten into metal, but he kind of turned me on to all the great metal.
Yeah.
And then one day he says to me, he's like, you know what you should do for a living? And I was like, what? He's like, you should be like a rock and roll impresario or concert promoter. Like, this is your love. And I'm like, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
So then I get a job interning for Faye Concerts, which is like the Golden Voice of Colorado.
Okay.
And it was like the greatest unpaid summer job ever. So I got a job working at Red Rocks, which I've been to concerts all over the world. I'll argue to this day that it's the greatest concert venue, and there is no second place.
Yeah.
So I got to go to every concert for free for doing very little. I'd put
Amazing.
up posters with a tape gun around campus, and then
Who'd you see?
everybody. I mean, Grateful Dead and Peter Tosh and U2 and wouldn't call it Zeppelin, but Paige Plant did a tour through there. I mean, I pretty much went to every Red Rocks concert for a 3-year period.
Wow.
Every metal band, I mean, everybody.
That's cool.
And I was just like, I don't even know why I'm going to college. Like, this is what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah.
So then after college, I moved to New York City briefly with this ex-girlfriend of mine, and her dad was a William Morris agent. And I don't even know what the William Morris agency was. So we move into this apartment. It was like a 7-bedroom, 7-bath apartment.
Wow.
And I'm like, and I got there before she did, like a couple days before. It just worked out that way. I'm like, this is an amazing apartment. And her dad was just hooked up. I didn't really know what he did, but he was hooked up. Like if we wanted to see a concert.
7 bedrooms in New York.
Yeah, with Chopin's piano in the living room. Like it was major.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't get, if we wanted to see a concert at Madison Square Garden, we wouldn't get front row. We would get 2 fold-up chairs set up for us in front of the front row. And I'm like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life.
Incredible.
So we did that, and to be fair, I didn't really try that hard, but my parents are like, you need to get your shit together. You need to have a job. You can't just be like riding your Harley Davidson around Manhattan and partying and while we're supporting you.
Yeah.
The ice is melting beneath your feet. Get your shit together, get a job, or we're going to cut you off. And I know you think we won't, but we will.
Yeah.
So, of course, I tried a little bit, but not that hard. And then Jen, my girlfriend, says to me one day, she goes, I'm sick of New York. I go, you know what? I'm sick of New York, too. It's too loud. It's too smelly. It's just too hectic. She goes, do you want to move to Megève? And I go, France? And she goes, yeah. And I go, why? And she goes, I don't know. Like, I'm thinking, like, I don't need to ever work. So I'm thinking we just be a ski bums.
Nice.
And she had this place in Beaver Creek, you know, just like next to Vail. And I'm like, dude, I can't just be a ski bum. Like, I don't have your dough. My parents are telling me I have to get a job. And she goes, well, okay, I think I'm going to go to Megève. And it was like the most civilized breakup ever. And I'm like, all right, cool. And she goes, what are you going to do? I go, I don't know. Maybe go back home to Chicago.
Yeah.
So I call her mom. And she's like, yeah, I heard you and Jen broke up. Are you guys cool? I'm like, yeah, we're totally cool. It was great. And she goes, you want to come by and talk to me and Lee? And I was like, yeah, let's catch up. So I go to the William Morris agency, and I'm like, what the fuck is this place? There's like hundreds of people here, and he's got an office you could land an airplane in. And I sit down with them, and the dad goes, so what are you going to do? I go, I don't know. And he goes, do you want to be in the agent training program here? And I go, maybe. Do I have to dress all like all these people and wear a suit and tie every day? And he goes, yeah. I go, definitely not. So he goes, okay. Well, do you want to keep the apartment? I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I'm almost always in LA now. When I'm in New York, I need 24-hour room service, and I stay at the Waldorf Astoria in the presidential suite. I go, nice. He goes, so keep the apartment. I go, for how long? He goes, for as long as you want.
Wow.
So I'm like, all right. So now I'm living at Museum Tower, palatial digs, but I know I'm about to be cut off. I got my car in the garage. I got a motorcycle in the garage. I'm like, this is like the life of Riley. If I could figure out a way to make this work. But of course I was a kid, and I just think this is my life, and you think that it's always going to be this way.
Yeah.
So eventually I had to leave.
Yeah.
Checked out at 15 West 53rd. I went back to my parents for a little bit. And I got a job at this management company. It was like 2 companies operating out of the same office. It was this management company with a few artists, and then a publishing, like a sub-publishing company with Warner Chappell, who was run by this guy, Doogie Thompson, who was the bassist for Supertramp, if you remember that.
Yeah, sure.
And I worked there for a few years, and I was, I was an assistant, and there was really no path. It was the guys that owned these companies
Right.
and me.
Yeah.
So I did that as long as I could, and I was just tired of those just oppressive winters. And
So wait, because you started interning in the concert business, was there any thought to kind of continue in that?
I left a part of that story out. So I wasn't really making much money. I think those guys were paying me $350 a week.
Right.
So my side hustle was, there was this club, and I don't know if you remember it from here, but there was one in New York, there was one in LA, and there was one in Aspen. It was called the China Club.
Yeah.
So they built David Boyd and David Barrett, the China Club guys, built a massive place in Chicago. It was about 150,000 square feet, had 3 or 4 stages. And do you remember Pro Jam?
Yeah.
So you'd have like a house band, and then celebrities would show up and jam every week.
Right.
So they're like, you're in charge of Pro Jam.
Nice.
So I'm like, dope. So it's not easy, there's not many celebrities in Chicago. There's like Dave Mason and, you know what I mean? Just like a few people who lived there. So, I wasn't stupid. So I'd look at all the music mags and I'd find out who was coming to town, and then I'd hit their management company. So we did pretty well. We got, I got the Black Crowes to come, and I got Eric Clapton to come. And man, do I wish I videotaped all that stuff. So like I did it, and I had this house band of mostly session guys, and that was fun. And then I started promoting concerts around the city.
Nice.
So did a lot of stuff there. On New Year's you could walk out with a 6-figure payday. It was like all cash.
Yeah.
And then I moved here, and I was kind of a lost soul, kind of wandering around. Like I'd spent all my money. I'm like crashing in friends' houses until one day when I had to go out of town for one day to go back to Chicago for a court date. And that was the day of the 94 Northridge earthquake. So I'm sleeping at this girl's house downtown before I go to the court date. And she's like, dude, you hear there was an earthquake in LA? And I'm like, what are you waking me up for? I don't have to be up for an hour. There's always an earthquake in LA. And she goes, do you know where the 10 in Fairfax is? I said, yeah. I go, I'm driving home that way tonight. And she goes, oh, no, you're not. And I go, wait, what? And I wake up and I saw, do you remember the freeway collapsed on the 10, and a police officer, the motorcycle went over the edge and died. And I'm like, holy shit. I come back and this place was just like dust in the air and chaos and aftershocks 5 times a day. Do you remember all this?
I was here.
Yeah, it was bananas. Yeah. But I still didn't have a place to live. So my friend's dad had built this 10,000-foot mansion up on Mulholland. And he's real type A. He's like one of those people, like, you leave a cup and he like grabs it and cleans it. And he's like, Scott, do you have a place to live yet? And I go, no. And he goes, I'll tell you what, my house was yellow tagged. So your house could be red tagged and it was uninhabitable. Yeah. Green was no damage. Yellow was you could live there, but there had to be mandatory repairs.
Yeah, my girlfriend's house was yellow tagged.
Yeah. So this is in this gated community up on Mulholland. And he says, you can stay in the house, just keep an eye on make sure the workmen don't steal the pool furniture. Uh-huh. So I'm like, that's amazing. So my nickname for the house was Hotel Beirut, because like 6 chimneys had fallen over, the pool cracked and drained into the mountain. It was just this like rubble, like fake Tuscan, like tract mansion. Sorry, Jerry. But it was like a cheaply built mansion.
Yeah.
So
a lot of those up there.
And I was broke. I didn't even have enough money to get down the hill and back up. And my neighbors are like Wayne Gretzky, Shaquille O'Neal, Paula Abdul, Isaac Tigert owned Planet Hollywood. And there's this guy with the long red hair and a motorcycle. And I was so broke. There was a time where I was living off of the avocados and the oranges on the trees. And I'm like, when does avocado season go until? And it was terrifying.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while. And then I kind of told you the rest, and then it became sort of internet, and then I was working at the studios. I worked at Universal. I worked at Disney, doing IT stuff and consulting for them. I was part of the featured talent pool at Universal, so I'd look after all the people who had vanity deals. So like Amblin and Rob Cohen's company and Ivan Reitman's company, and I was just sort of like the concierge IT guy, which was chill. And then my buddy was business partners with Nicolas Cage and ran his production company, and then Nick became like kept me busy full time because he had 5 houses and the mother of his son, and then Patricia and her family, and so I was like the IT guy, and then we started with the websites, and then I became a photographer.
So I want to get into the
story,
the photography part, but You seem like a guy that people just want to help you.
No, sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels Sisyphean, like I'm pushing a rock up a hill.
Sure.
But
But you mentioned a couple of times some dude. It's like, how can I help you, or what do you need? Like, what is that? Do you feel like you attract that, or is there something?
I don't know. I'm not an asker.
Yeah.
Like I hate, like if someone knows I know somebody and says, "Can you get me tickets for this?" I'm like, I don't ask, and they're like, "Just ask. It's a friend of yours." I'm like, I'm not an asker.
Yeah.
So, and I probably should be a bit more of an asker.
Yeah.
I'm working on it, but I think it's that, I don't know. In Chicago, when people go out at night, they go out to get drunk and get laid.
Sure.
In LA, I feel like people go out to further their career, and that's just never been who I am.
Yeah.
Like I don't ask people what they do in the first 5 minutes. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
talk about ideas, not people, that sort of thing.
Sure.
So I don't know. Maybe I'm just sort of non-threatening in that way,
Huh.
and maybe not as ambitious as I should be as a result. But
I don't know. I mean, I think there's that kind of go-getter persona that's like fearless and ask for, Tony Robbins is telling everybody to like boldly, ask for what you want and all that. And I think there's probably something to that, and there's also something to not doing that. And I don't know if it's like, I think maybe any of that taken too far is a problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I just always err on caution's side and just be cool. You know.
Yeah. So, how'd you get into photography?
So I've always been a photographer. For my 9th birthday, so my dad had an office in this, in the very beginning of his career. He couldn't afford a warehouse or anything, and he had this little office that was probably the size of this room with boxes in it. And this building that he rented in it was called the 325 West Huron building, and it was an old kind of deco, classic Chicago building, union elevator operator. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I think it was a 15-story building, and about 7 or 8 stories of it was a camera store, kind of like the Sammys of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And, union dock workers, like old Teamster types, like a real kind of OG gangstery Chicago building.
Yeah.
And there were photographers in the building, and there was a modeling agency, and Kodak had offices there. So it was just kind of weird that my dad, with this like box business selling light bulbs, would be in this kind of photo thing. So I liked going to work with him because they had these beautiful marble floors everywhere, and I loved skateboarding up and down those silky smooth hallways. Uh-huh. And then one day, this guy stops me, and he was like, "Hey, can I take your picture?" I'm a stranger danger guy. So I go, "Why?" And he's like, "No, I'd just like to take your picture." I'm like, "Well, you got to ask my dad. He's down the hall." He's like, "Well, take me to him." So my dad's like, "Kid, do you want to do this?" And I said, "Sure." So I'm like on my skateboard, like showing off, which turned into a kind of a brief modeling career. I did like a Marshall Fields catalog and some stuff like that, but I wasn't really that interested in that. So I got to know these photography guys, and I'd knock on their door, and I'd be like, "You shooting today?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." And I'd be like, "Can I watch?" And they'd be like, "If you sit in that stool in the corner and you don't say anything all day, you can watch." Mm-hmm. So then, my 9th birthday rolls around. My dad's like, "Do you want what do you want? You want an air hockey table?" I'm like, "No, I want a dark room." And my mother's like, "He's not playing with chemicals. He's 9 years old." And he's like, "He's not going to eat chemicals." So they built me a dark room, and I started shooting. And I'd tell my parents I was going to a friend's house in my, jaded white suburbia. I'd tell them I was going to a friend's house, and I'd get on the subway, and I'd go to the worst neighborhoods in Chicago, and just like projects, knock on doors. I'd be like, "Can I take your picture?" I'm this little ginger kid with expensive photography equipment, and people were really cool. No one messed with me. They're like, "Yeah, you want to take a picture of my family? We're not giving you any money for it." And I'm like, "I don't want any money for it."
Right.
Because I'd seen like Bruce Davidson, who was this like amazing photographer who shot, and obviously Davidson's career was never in any danger. Mm-hmm. And you take lots of shitty pictures. You gradually, like anything, you get better at it. But it never occurred to me to turn pro. So, I always had a film camera in my hand. Always, always, always when I went out, which was a weird thing, like back in those days, nobody carried cameras.
No, I remember we had that one friend that always had the camera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
you were that guy.
Yeah, I was that guy. And I ran around town and this and that, and then I got really into golf, and I started playing golf all the time. And
As a kid.
Yeah, no, in LA.
Oh, okay.
I always thought it was for, just kind of like old Republicans with fat asses and plaid pants. Like,
Sure.
it was like nothing could, but then I discovered it here, and the weather was beautiful, and I just kind of fell in love with the game. Until one day my friend Misty said, "Do you know Davis Factor?" And I said, "No, I don't. I know his work. He's good." And she's like, "He loves golf too, and you guys both love taking pictures. You should play golf with him. I'm gonna set you up on a bro date." So I'm like, "Cool." So me and him and his brother and their other brother started playing golf all the time, and that went on for a long time. And then Dean, who's like the businessman do you know those guys?
Not personally.
Yeah, so they're Smashbox Studios, Smashbox Cosmetics. Davis is the photographer, and Dean, his brother, is the businessman. And they're the great-grandsons of Max Factor.
Right.
So we're walking up the 18th fairway one day at Riviera Country Club, and Dean says, we've decided you're turning pro as a photographer. I go, "You guys are out of your minds." I'm like, "I'm finally making a living at something. I'm not starting a career in the arts in my 30s.
Yeah.
And they're like, "It's written. You're doing it." So I'm like, "How the hell am I going to do that?" So he goes, "You know our studios?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Pretend you have the same last name as us. All the trucks, all the grip, all the lighting, it's all yours. Start shooting." So I'm like, "What do you mean start shooting? I don't know how to shoot in a studio. I'm a natural light guy. Not a process film and print." So Davis says, "What do you think of the future of this digital photography thing?" I go, "Well, it's catching on consumer. I think it's just a matter of time before it's going to catch on in the pro world too, as soon as they have the gear that's good enough."
So what year is that?
This is 2003-ish.
Okay.
So I'm like, some people make them. They're very expensive, but some people make medium format digital cameras.
Yeah.
So Davis goes, "Here's how it goes. You know a lot about computers. You're an IT guy, and you know a lot about cameras. Why don't you call these companies that make them, tell them that you represent Smashbox Studios and that you're interested in maybe purchasing one for the studio and that you want to test them." So I'm like, "Good idea, dude." So I call Kodak, who made this like Mamiya RZ-based back. I called Leaf, who is another company, and I called this other company I'd never heard of before called Phase One. And they were kind of dumb things. And I don't say dumb, but I mean literally dumb. They were backs that went on existing old school cameras. They'd go on a Mamiya RZ or go on an old Hasselblad or whatever. Old analog equipment adapters. So I have all three companies send me these machines, and I hole up in a studio at Smashbox in Culver City, and I shoot and I shoot and I shoot. And at the end of a week, I stick my head out, and I'm like, "This is the winner." And it was this Hasselblad, first generation Hasselblad digital body with their 11 megapixel digital back. Wow. So Davis goes, "I have an idea. Let's test it out. You're going to come on my shoots. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about handling a celebrity photo shoot, about directing, about lighting, and you're going to teach me and everybody else at the studio about how these contraptions work." So I was really the first digital tech in LA.
Yeah.
So, and at the time I was dating his studio manager, who was also his retoucher. So he's like, "We're going to shoot side by side. I'll shoot some film, you'll shoot some digital, we'll switch, and then we'll basically let my studio manager decide which images are the best ones." So she loved it because she didn't have to spend the first hour of every frame cleaning off dust and scanning and all this shit, and there was so much more dynamic range. In hindsight now, I'm like shooting a lot of film, and I think it's totally superior. But at the time, you didn't see detail like that before.
Yeah.
So Davis said to me, he said, "Just so you know, one day I'm going to fire you. When I feel like I can't teach you anymore, I'm just going to throw you out of the nest and you got to go shoot. And you have to promise me you're not going to start being a digital tech for other people." I was like, "All right, I promise." So we shot tons of campaigns and tons of celebrity covers and just tons of advertising. And then one day, I can't remember who we were shooting. We were finishing, I think, an editorial for like a Spanish Vogue or something. And he goes, "All right, that's a wrap, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Scott, you're fired." And I go, "Wait, what?" He goes, "I told you this day was going to come. Time to fly, little birdie."
Wow.
So I'm like, "Fuck, what do I do?" So he's like, "Start testing." So I'm like, "Okay." So I take an unbooked room at Smashbox one day and a model there, and I start setting up lights. Then I step outside to smoke a cigarette, and I see, I think it was Gilles Ben-Simon. He was like a legendary fashion photographer. And he goes, "Hey, what are you doing in there?" And I said, "I'm just shooting a test." He goes, "Let me see." He opens the door. He goes, "You're not doing anything in here." He goes, "Where's your team? Where's your hair, your makeup, your wardrobe?" I go, "I don't have any of that. I'm just testing."
Yeah.
He goes, "Let me tell you something, kid," with his thick accent. He says, "If you don't have the best hair, the best makeup, the best wardrobe, and the best lighting, how are you going to knock someone like me off the fence post?" And he was totally 100% right. Yeah. Like, you will never be competitive. So I would save up my money, do a test, do it again, and then I begged Hollywood Life. It was Movie Line magazine back then. I was like, "Please give me something to shoot." They're like, "We don't even know you, no." And I'm like, "Give me something to shoot." And they're like, "No." And I'm like, "Give me a quarter page, give me an eighth page." And they were like, "No." So I'm like, "I'm not leaving till you give me something." So they're like, "Fine, we'll give you like a quarter of a page with a celebrity." I'm like, "Who's a celebrity?" And they're like, "Frankie Muniz from Malcolm in the Middle." I'm like, "Fine." So I do this like really good picture with him, his publicist, Annette Wolf, who I knew because she was Nick Cage's publicist. And they started feeding me stuff. And then my real lucky break in photography was one of the vice presidents of Smashbox Cosmetics, who I'd worked with Davis on all these shoots, says, "Can you shoot beauty like Davis does?" And I'm like, "Well, I've been watching him do it for 8 months. Yeah, I can do all of his moves."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Cool," because I left Smashbox and I'm with another brand. And I said, "What's the brand called?" I said, "The brand's called Too Faced Cosmetics." I'm like, "Oh, I've seen their shit around. They don't do photography. They just have like illustration. It looks like it's made for kids." She goes, "Yeah, I want to grow the brand up." So I'm like, "Okay, cool." So she's like, "I want you to like study them. I want you to put together a creative brief for Too Faced Cosmetics." So I'm thinking, Too Faced. All right, we'll do this sort of Gilligan's Island James Bond thing. We'll have like one good girl, one bad girl, one blonde girl, one brunette. Yeah. I put together this brief and I go down to Orange County and I pitch this married gay couple the pitch. I'm like, we'll have one fierce, like one Marianne who's like the sweet blonde, and we'll have one bitch blonde. And they're like, "We love it." They go, "We've never done a photo shoot. What's the next step?" And I said, "The next step is casting." So they're like, "How's that work?" I'm like, "Well, we get a casting studio, and I call all the agencies, and they send out girls, and I'll get 100 blondes sent out, and I'll get 100 on one day, and I'll get 100 brunettes sent out the other day, and then we'll pick." So they're like, "All right, cool, do it." So I do a casting over at exclusive Above LA Models, and I see 100 blondes the first day, and like the third girl to walk in the door, she was the South African girl with like ice blonde and like a piercing blue eyes. I'm like, "That's my girl." So I book her. The next day I see 100 brunettes. I don't see anyone I like. And the CEO of Too Faced is like, "Honey, you saw 100 models in LA. You can't find one girl you want to shoot?" I'm like, "Not one." I'm like, "Can I have another casting day?" They're like, "This studio costs $475. Pick one." Right. I go, "No, let me have another casting day." And they're like, "No." And I'm like, "Can we look at girls from New York?" They're like, "Are you out of your mind? Stop spending all of our money. Just pick one." So I'm like, "Give me a few hours to think about this." So I call him back and I said, "I have an idea. I haven't asked her yet, but I have this girl that I think would be really good for it." And they're like, "Oh, cool. What agency is she with?" And I go, "She's not a model." And they're like, "What?" They go, "What does she do?" I said, "She's a singer." They said, "That's an interesting idea. What record company is she with?" I go, "She doesn't have a record deal." They're like, and the guy literally says, "Are you insane? You're going to put your balls on the chopping block for an unsigned artist in your very first advertising campaign?" I go, "Yep." And he goes, "What's her name?" True story. I go, "Katy Perry." He goes, "We never heard of her." I said, "You will." So I called Perry and I'm like, "Katie, what are you doing tomorrow?" She's like, "Oh my God, I'm writing with one of my favorite all-time songwriters. His name's Glenn Ballard, and he did Alanis Morissette's record that I love." I'm like, "You got to reschedule that." She's like, "You're out of your fucking mind. This guy's like a huge producer." Yeah. Like, "How much money do you have right now, Katie?" And she goes, "Nothing. Like, I have nothing." And I go, "I have a job that pays $7,500, and all you have to do is get your picture taken all day and dress up." She goes, "I'll call and reschedule the meeting." So I pick up Katy Perry at her little apartment on Burton Way, and I'm like, "You better charm these gay dudes." She's like, "Dude, charming gay dudes is my jam. That's what I do." So she rolls in and charms. As you can imagine, she was still the same person. Sure. And she was just like my buddy. I met her when she just moved here and was like, had been doing Christian songs in Santa Barbara. And so she charmed the pants off them. We did this campaign. It was, thinking back, it was by far the dumbest, riskiest thing I've ever done, and conversely, the smartest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
So from Too Faced, I ended up getting the Sephora Book of Beauty. I ended up getting Ulta and HSN and QVC and Urban Decay and all these beauty brands. And I never wanted to be a beauty photographer like Davis was,
Right.
but I wanted to do like kind of 80s Rolling Stone. I wanted to shoot bands and, you know, colorful, comedic, ironic, high concept, like tell whole stories in 125th of a second. But as the saying goes, you chop down one tree and everyone thinks you're a lumberjack. So I became like a guy who sold hair and makeup. And Dita was like kind of, I met Dita through the first ever paid job I had, which was barely professional, was shooting this series called Strip Search for Playboy.
Okay.
Where my fraternity brother Greg was producing this home video and Playboy TV series called Strip Search, where we would travel the country from sea to shining sea shooting strippers. So he's like, "You're a photographer, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Kind of." He's like, "Do you think you could figure out how to light a white background?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know pro photographers. I'll ask them what the math is, you know? It's just math."
Yeah.
So I figured that out. So we went on the road to all these cities shooting strippers for Playboy. And the first city we shot in was Phoenix, Arizona. The first stripper I shot with was Dita Von Teese. So,
Amazing.
yeah, so then Dita, who's kind of, for better or worse, kind of become one of my calling cards, like how people know me, is she said, she's like, "You know me, I'm like shy and I don't really get along with all people. I want you to shoot some work for I got a deal with HarperCollins. I want you to shoot with me for my Book of Beauty, and it's going to be the best thing either one of us has ever done." And I'm like, awesome. And those pictures obviously turned out very successful. So that's the circuitous, happy accident that became my photography career.
Amazing.
Yeah. But I also do really masculine stuff. You know, like I said, I shoot Marines and I've shot National Hockey League. And, you know, so I'm just kind of all creative pursuits, as we discussed, are good.
Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting because, you know, you started off kind of like, sorry to recap our conversation, but like you sort of started off like almost happy-go-lucky, like I said, people just want to help you and you're like, yeah, okay, whatever, maybe. And then all of a sudden you're like, won't take no for an answer. Like
Which was not like me to do that.
Yeah, so where does that come from?
I don't know. That was just like a moment of desperation. I'm like, I have nothing to lose. This woman's being horrible to me. She's being really mean. So like, I'll just refuse to leave her office and see where it goes.
Yeah.
But I don't ever do things like that. And I haven't since. And then these bedtime stories, I've always been.
Yeah. So talk about that. So it's on.
Yeah, let's jump into
it's
that.
On Medium, right?
What?
So it's on Medium.
Yeah, I'd never even heard. I mean, I'd heard of Medium, but I'd never looked at it before.
Yeah.
So I've always been a storyteller, like we're talking right now. But I would write stuff, journal stuff, I would say, that were really the bones of all of these things. But I never considered showing anyone these. So I've always had periods in my life where I had just terrible insomnia. It was just like Fight Club, like never awake, never asleep.
Yeah.
And I knew every 24-hour place in LA just because, you know, it would just drive me crazy to not be able to sleep. I'd go to the 24-hour Good Guys on La Cienega and then go to that Rexall next door. And I knew all the other insomniacs in town. Not personally.
I used to love that Good Guys.
But I'd see like Rick Rubin driving around all night. We'd run into each other. And I could tell he was just like listening to music with his turban on. And we'd be like, it got to the point where like I had this old Saab and we would like, and he had his Bentley and we'd like nod at each other. Amazing. So I started writing these things called Bedtime Stories for Grown-Ups to try to put myself to sleep. And people have always liked inviting me to dinners and on vacations because like I'm the guy that'll, you know, just pull my string and be like, tell everybody the story about you and the XYZ. And I would just tell stories. So like people would just like invite me on these cool vacations.
Yeah.
So some people are like, you should write stuff. And I'm like, I do. And they're like, you should post something. I'm like, I don't know about that. So I posted one story. I don't even remember what the first story. I think it was about the golf with O.J. Simpson story.
It's great.
Like right after the murder.
Yeah.
And I posted it and then went to work the next day, did a shoot. I come home and like my photography does okay and social media does pretty well. But I didn't see anything like this. This was like 200 comments and like 500 likes. And I'm like, holy fucking shit. And it's, you know, that stuff, it's like dopamine. It's addictive, that attention.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm going to edit another one of my old stories. I do another one, and people were like, holy fucking shit. And I just started doing them, and people were just like, I fucking love bedtime stories. And then just recently, I get an email from a stranger who doesn't even know anyone I know. It's this woman in Miami, and she lives in Coconut Grove, I assume in a fancy place. And she goes, I have a dinner party every Saturday night with 25, 30 people. And I begin every dinner by reading or making someone else read one of your stories out loud.
No way.
And I'm like, it's the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm like, you tell my dirty stories at a dinner party? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, this is really cool. So I'm like, all right, maybe I should try to sell these now, you know? So that's kind of what I'm working on. So I thought it was a series of books, and I have a lot of them. I have 50 done and like another 30 soon to be done.
Yeah.
So I always thought it was a series of books, and then I have friends in different creative pursuits, and I have one friend who's an illustrator. And then I saw, did you ever see that Vice video of Ninja and Kanye West?
No.
Okay, so I'm not really a big D'Antwoord fan, and I'm not a Kanye West fan, but I saw all these cool people who I really respect posting this video on social media about less than a year ago. And I'm like, I'm not interested in either one of those guys, but smart people are posting this. I'm gonna check it out. So I'm trying to fall asleep, probably on Ambien. And it's Ninja from D'Antwoord telling the story about how he gets a FaceTime phone call from Paris Hilton in the middle of the night. And she was like, my friend wants to talk to you. And I'm like looking behind her on the FaceTime, and she's wasted, and there's Kanye West behind her. And it's like, he's like, I'm in bed. And Kanye's like, yo, roll through. Have you seen this? And he goes to and he goes over to Kanye's house the next day and just tells this amazing story. I'll let you guys watch it, but he goes to Kanye West and ends up playing basketball with Drake, who already hates his guts because he had went on Yolandi's Instagram and posted a meme that said Drake is a massive faggot. So there's this huge rap war between Drake and D'Antwoord. And I'm like, that's the format. That is the format for my stories.
Yeah.
So now I'm definitely high on Ambien. It kicked in, and I didn't remember doing this, but I emailed this French guy who was the producer or the director of this video for Vice. And I totally black out and forget that I did it, but I left the tab open. So I'm like, if this is as good as I thought it was when I was falling asleep on a sleeping pill, let's see.
Yeah.
So I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, that's better than I thought it was. And I watch it again and I'm like, that's better than I thought it was. That's amazing. This is the thing. And then I get an email from this French guy, and he's like, hey, I got your email. I checked out your story. Did you write all these? I go, yeah. He goes, are they all true? I'm like, they're all true. And he goes, Monsieur, let's work together. So I'm like, cool, should we do a spec? And he goes, no, find somebody to pay for them, but I'd love to work with you. So I'm just like, at least people like them.
Yeah.
So then I started just, I got addicted to the attention, and I've been posting them. There's only, just been a few months.
Sure.
But it's working. So now it's time to do something with them. So yeah, I think graphic novel, book, animated shorts.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I love the OJ story. I never met OJ, but
I hadn't either before or since.
But like late 90s, I got invited to a dinner party at Kato's house.
Okay.
And my girlfriend at the time was like so furious with me that I would even consider going to
Kaelin's house?
Yeah, going to like hang out with
people were
Kato.
upset about that.
And I was like, but it was the same thing like you, is like, I just want the experience. Like, I don't have to agree. I don't have to like the person or agree with, who they are, what they do, whatever, but I want the adventure.
100%.
Yeah.
Just get a story to tell out of it.
Yeah.
It's funny. I circuitously met Kato back in those days too.
I mean, he was around. He was
out every night.
Yeah.
He didn't miss the opening of an envelope.
Yeah.
So do you remember, what was that late night Italian restaurant that everyone would go to after drinking on Melrose? With that, on the sidewalk cafe?
Yeah. Was it Luna? It was like Luna.
Yeah,
it was
I think
Luna
it was
Cafe.
It was Luna Cafe.
Yeah.
I've been asking other people
Yeah.
this, and you're the first person who pulled it. So I'm there with a bunch of people. We had left the whiskey bar at the Sunset Marquee, and we're all just there eating. And I end up next to Kato, Kaelin, and a date. You know how it was just kind of like long,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all the
Everyone's,
tables
like,
were kind of connected.
crammed in,
on
yeah.
the sidewalk. So I got this, not my brother-in-law, my first cousin Deborah's husband was like, if you ever see that Kato Kaelin out there, I grew up with him. And I'm like, dude, if I ever see him, is this going to be really one of those, like, you met him or do you know him?
Right,
Like,
right,
you
right.
for sure know him, otherwise it's going to be embarrassing. He's like, dude, I fucking know him.
Yeah.
So we're all drunk and we're sitting there and we start chit-chatting. I go, hey, do you know Andy Pokrass? He goes, yeah, I know Andy Pokrass. How do you know Andy Pokrass? I'm like, it's my cousin Deborah's first, of her husband. He goes, yeah, we're from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, and we went to school together. We grew up together. So I call up Andy and I wake him up and he's like, hey Scott, what's up? And I'm like, I have Kato Kaelin. And I just hand him the phone. And that happened.
That's so funny.
And now the only time I will ever run into Kato Kaelin is if I'm with people who I don't want to know that I know Kato Kaelin, because that's just the kind of, like, you know,
Sure.
like I'm fine knowing everybody, but it's always that thing, like, you're talking and he just shows up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, should we talk about the OJ thing a little bit?
Yeah, I love it.
All right, so I told you I was really into golf for a while. So me and my buddy Bob, who's an AD, we go play, we're playing a lot of these municipal dog tracks, these just like local park district courses. And we go to this valley course called Encino Balboa. It's 2 courses. And we go as a pair, and it's kind of a ratty city course. So we go and we pay our greens fees and we pick up our golf cart. We're getting ready to tee off and we go to the first tee. And there's this like young black guy and he's wearing like running clothes. He's got like a tank top and like kind of like dolphin shorts and he's all fit and like a ratty old golf bag. And I'm like, dude, are you a single or do you have someone meeting you? Are we threesome or are we a foursome? And he says, no, I'm a single. I go, I'll tell you what, let's all tee it. And if someone shows up, they can go with us. And if not, we'll play faster because we'll be a 3.
Yeah.
And we're like, all right. So we're all like kind of, I think I hit my ball and then Bob was getting ready to hit his ball. And I look up in the distance and I'm like, no fucking way. I see OJ, unmistakable OJ. And he did not look like he belongs on this golf course because he had just been kicked out of Riviera. I guess despite being acquitted, I guess he decided that they're not really the Rivs look anymore.
Yeah.
He's not really the Rivs look anymore. And he's wearing like a cashmere, like tan cashmere sweater vest, unbranded, with a white polo and like tailored pants and like perfect FootJoy saddle shoes without a mark on them, like country club scrubbed, and a matching tan visor, unbranded. And I'm like, at Balboa Golf Course. It's like, oh, Bob, I elbow him and he says, he goes, no fucking way. I go, dude, this is going to be amazing. He goes, I'm not playing golf with that fucking murderer. I said, oh, yes, you are. He goes, there's no fucking way, Nathan. There's no way I'm playing golf with that fucking murderer. I said, good, then take a cab home. I drove.
Yeah.
He goes, fuck you. And then OJ walks up, boom, and happy. And he's like, hey, fellas, how you doing? And I'm like, hey. And I find myself putting my hands in my pockets. Like, I'll play golf with him, but I'm not going to shake his hand, And I could tell there's something. The black guy that was with us is seething. He's not pleased at all. So I see him, he's got like a cloudy Ziploc bag in his golf bag full of tees and markers and stuff, and he's just down there just like, motherfucker.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, what is going on here? And OJ looks at him and goes, how you doing, brother? And the guy mutters, I'm not your brother, motherfucker. And OJ goes from all smiles to just rage. His eyes widen and he goes, say what? And the guy just stands up, takes 3 giant strides to him, steps nose to nose, and goes,
Wow.
I said, I'm not your brother, motherfucker. And I'm like, holy shit, this is going to be the greatest day ever. and it's just like a Mexican standoff. These 2 guys are staring at each other just like, and I could see the wheels in OJ's head turning. He's just like, I just got off a murder trial. I can't get in a fight. There's just no way. You just saw this shit going. Like, he wants to get in a fight. He's old. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So he starts walking away, slowly walking away. And he's got one of those golf bags that nobody has, like only pros have, and people who get them at celebrity golf tournaments.
Yeah.
A big touring bag with his name monogrammed on it and a big Cleveland golf logo. And he's huffing this big leather bag. And he walks like 20 steps and then stops and slams his bag on the ground and spins on his heels. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a big fight. And the guy's still standing there. The guy puts his arms out like he's Jesus Christ and he goes like this. He goes, sup? And him and OG are staring at each other again. Then OG just like knows his bluff's been called and he's like, motherfucker. And he walks away. So it's like obviously an awkward first few holes. That guy was still fucking pissed.
Yeah,
We're
of
not
course.
playing golf with OJ, so I'm a little disappointed about that. So, but we saw him all day because he went out with the next group. So
way.
like on every fairway, we'd see him just like, he'd be like looking over with the side eye, and then that guy'd be just like, yeah, fuck you, motherfucker. So that was my time almost playing golf with OJ Simpson.
That's amazing.
And it was right after the criminal trial acquittal, but before the civil trial had started.
Right.
But it was all anybody talked about here
Sure,
and
yeah, of
everywhere.
course, everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
So
That's so crazy. I mean, I feel like that stuff only happens in LA, that you run into people like that.
yeah, and thanks for the clap, by the way, on the con woman story.
Oh my God. That was an incredible story. And back to my point about people kind of wanting to help you.
Yeah, or not, you know,
Well, sure.
or maybe I was a mark. I will never know.
Do you ever I'll let people read that story, and they
Good.
should, because it's fantastic. But
Should we plug the location?
yeah.
So it's at medium.com/@Scott Nathan.
Cool. Lots of great bedtime stories.
Thanks. I'm migrating them there. I think I've got 8 or 9 there, but
Okay.
I've got a lot more that I've had in other places that I'll start
Yeah.
kind of drip feeding there.
That's so cool. So do you ever live to regret them?
No. I mean, it's not to say that I don't have any regrets in my life.
Sure. No, but I mean, like, so that, the con woman story or the model apartment, I love that one too. You're kind of like, again, you're kind of like just down for the adventure. Let shit happen. Are there any that you're like, oh fuck, I really shouldn't have done that one?
Thankfully, I've come away unscathed. I don't know if you read it, but my college graduation night one, where I ended up in a maximum security penitentiary
Okay.
on a failure to appear in court on a bicycle ticket on my college graduation day.
Awesome.
And I'm old. This was 1988, I think, when 88 or 89. When I graduated, so no pagers, no cell phones.
Yeah.
My fraternity house had shut off their phone for the summer. I had nobody to call. I dropped my parents off after commencement at the Denver airport. It was called Stapleton back then. And I'm driving back in this really fast. I get clocked for speeding between Denver and Boulder. And back in those days, there wasn't that much between Denver and Boulder, and there wasn't a police station close by. So they're like, yeah, you have an FTA? And I'm like, what's that? And they're like, failure to appear. And I'm like, no, I don't. For what? And they're like, you had a bicycle infraction against a don't walk sign on the hill on campus? And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So how do we just pay that? And he goes, are you offering a police officer money? And I'm like, no, but is there like somewhere I could follow you to and I'll just pay it?
Yeah.
They're like, no, it doesn't work like that. You're under arrest. I'm like, dude, it's my college graduation night. I'm still wearing my gown. You can't do this. He's like, telling me what I can't do? And I'm like, I got long hair. This guy doesn't like me in the first place.
It's not going to go your way.
It's not going to go my way at all. So they tow my car, a prison bus that's like, looks like it was painted with a brush, painted white, and it's got that steel mesh like a patio table, like those wrought iron patio tables that like mesh is welded over all the windows. And I'm getting on a prison bus with prisoners.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is fucking bad. So they take me to this place behind 50-foot hurricane razor wire electrified fences. I'm like, you guys, before we go into the prison, you gotta let me take my graduation gown off. I'm like, this is not a look. So he goes, oh, okay, let me help you with that. So he takes me from being handcuffed in the prison bus and unlocks them, and I'm like, oh, cool, at least he's being somewhat cool. And then he re-handcuffs me like this.
No way.
So I can't get the gown off. So he takes me to this cell and puts me in with these two guys that look like Grizzin.com, these huge brothers. And they're not even like scary. They're literally just laughing at the spectacle. Like this guy with long hair and a graduation gown. and they're both cracking up, which is extra scary to me. And one of them goes, "What's up, Judge?" I'm like, oh, Jesus. So I end up there like all day and all night. And I'm like, I want my fucking phone call. And I don't have a good attitude anymore. I'm like, you're fucking ruining my graduation over a bicycle ticket. You guys are fucking assholes. I knew it was already, the train had left the station. Like, it wasn't going to help, but it wasn't going to hurt. They had to like...
Sure.
And they're like giving me a phone call, but I can't reach anybody. My parents are on a plane. All my friends' phones are shut off for the summer. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm like, I remembered the phone number for some reason. We remembered phone numbers more back then because we didn't have our phones. And I remembered the phone number for the Boulder limousine service, which was this rickety bunch of shitty really old limos, but they were cheap. You could get a limo ride to the airport for like $30 and like a battered old Lincoln. Yeah. So I knew the guy because I'd been using him for 4 years. And I'm like, Larry? And he's like, who's this? I'm like, it's Scott Nathan. He's like, what's up, Scott? I go, listen, I'm in the Brighton County prison. He goes, yeah, I know, because when you call somebody, they're like, you have a call from a prisoner. So he's like, I'm like, I need you to do something for me. And he goes, what? I'm like, I need you to get a cash advance on my dad's American Express. He's like, Scott, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm like, you're not going to get in trouble, but I'm in jail, and you're my only hope. He's like, all right. So he gets a cash advance American Express and picks me up in a battered old silver stretched Lincoln Continental as the sun's rising. And I've been in this shitty cell all night, yelling, fucking miserable. And I'm like, I've never been so high. I saw them in the little black and white security monitors. And they're like, you get a limousine to pick you up? And these cops are, if they hated me before, they really hate me now. Sure. They're like, you can't do that. I go, bullshit. You told me the rules are you have to have someone bring the money in physical cash, and it needs to be someone you know. I know him. He's bringing money. Fuck you. You have to let me out. Yeah. I was a bratty little kid, so I had a big mouth. So I get in the limo, and Larry hands me like a Stoli on the rocks, and I'm like, that was it.
Incredible.
How did we even get on this subject?
I don't know, but that's a great story.
Anyway.
Let's talk about Confessional.
Yeah.
So, I want to hear about the concept and how it came together, but talk about the music. So all the women, you filmed 100 women, right?
Yeah, but at 119 at the moment.
And everyone listens to the same song.
Yep.
What's the song?
So the song is the soundtrack to a Miles Davis soundtrack to kind of an obscure French film from 1958 called Ascenseur pour le Chauffeur, which means Elevator to the Gallows. It's a Louis Malle film.
Why did you choose that music?
Okay, so if you haven't figured it out already, I was a bit of a weird kid. So I was very young. I'd figured out, my parents had shown me how to work their record player. And it was one of those big, like, Zenith-y console systems, like the wooden wicker speakers. And I would, once I figured out how to work the record player, I'd literally go through my parents' whole vinyl collection one at a time and just listen to them as curious children do. And I found this record. And I would listen to it over and over and over again. And my parents were like, do you want to listen to the Beach Boys? And I'd be like, they're like, do you want to listen to Sesame Street? I'd be like, this. Yeah. And they're like, why am I listening to this sad, dark jazz record over and over and over again? So I loved it. So when I started Confessional, and I'll tell you how I arrived there, it needed to be music is such a powerful sense memory for all of us. It needed to be a piece of music that only I would know. Because otherwise you don't have a baseline for the experiment. Yeah. So I'm rewinding to a few hours before that. I'm doing an interview with a French journalist over a couple bottles of wine at Chateau Marmont. And it's this French guy. And when the French want to talk to me, I'm under no illusion. And if the French want to talk to me, I know it's going to be about Dita somehow. They might pretend to be interested in me, but it's always Dita. Is that right? Even though she's like from Michigan / Orange County, she's for some reason like a French icon. So we're talking, and we get through like a bottle and a half of rosé, talking about all different stuff. And he says to me, Monsieur, is it true that the camera never lies? And I go, fuck you, no. No, I hate that expression. He goes, no, it's a very old expression. The camera never lies. And I go, listen, dude, the camera is a tool of deception, always and without exception. He goes, no. What about war photographers? I go, they lie more than I do, and I sell soap. And he goes, how do they lie? I go, you'll see the cover of Life magazine and be 125th of a second, and it will dictate the entire narrative of an entire war.
Sure.
And he goes, very interesting. I'm like, it is interesting, isn't it? So I finish up the interview, and I'm walking down the steps, and I'm waiting for my Uber to pick me up, and I said to myself, I wonder how long I'd have to point a camera at someone before you knew who they were. And right at this moment, my phone rings, and it's this actress friend of mine. And I said to her, how long do you think I'd have to point a movie camera at you before anyone would know conclusively who you were as a person? She goes, I have no idea. You want to shoot tonight? I'm like, of course, every actress always wants to be in front of a camera. I'm like, yeah, give me a couple hours to sober up and come over. So I get home, I throw up a duvetine, which is like a black backdrop on my wall, and I throw up a couple of continuous light sources, and I set up my camera on a tripod, and I'm like, I need there to be music. And that's when I had that revelation about this Miles Davis piece. I'm like, I'm just gonna play this. And then I had to think of some direction. So she gets there, what's the direction, what's the motivation? I'm like, there's no motivation whatsoever. The direction is, be still, like a portrait. Don't take your eyes off the center of the lens. She goes, for how long? I said, we'll see. So I roll camera, I roll music. And
Naked?
I said, no.
Okay.
I mean, I said no makeup. So, and I thought, I'm a beauty guy, so I thought it was just gonna be portraiture.
Yeah.
So we do the one take, tight on face, and I didn't want to be in her eye line, so I go kind of down the hall behind a monitor, and I roll camera and I roll music, and for the first few minutes, it's like watching a bad headshot shoot happen. She's like doing this.
Right.
And I'm sitting there going, you drunken idiot, this is the dumbest idea you've ever had. This is just fucking terrible. I'm like, should I call cut? And I'm like, no, I'm just gonna let it run a little bit longer. So she goes from like posing to settling in, and I see her eyes widen. She starts looking a little freaked out, and I'm like, that's interesting. And then she starts looking panicked. And then at about 6 minutes in, the sky cracks open, and she burst into tears crying, and I'm like, that's some cinema right there.
Yeah.
So at around 10 minutes, I call cut. And I said, what happened back there, Megan? She goes, what do you mean? I said, what do I mean? Why'd you cry? She goes, Scott, I'm an actress. I cry all the time. I cry when I'm deciding what to wear to an audition. And I'm like, okay, this was a terrible idea.
It was just time.
What?
It was just time to cry.
Yeah. And I'm like, what a letdown.
No.
So I'm thinking, maybe I'll do another one of these sometime. Maybe I won't. So the next morning, I go to Bristol Farms, which is my little supermarket at Sunset and Fairfax. Just like a little, kind of like a tiny little supermarket. And I'm getting my morning coffee, and I hear my name in a foreign accent. Is that Scott Nathan? And I turn around, and it's Rachel Hunter, who's like a famous supermodel.
Yeah.
And we know each other a little bit from around town, but we're not like bros. We've never hung out, but we say hello if we see each other. So she says, how come you never asked me to shoot? I said, Rachel, I would love to shoot you. And she takes out her phone, and she goes, great. When? I said, anytime. She goes, fuck you. I said, what? She goes, when people in LA say anytime, they mean never.
They mean never.
So if you think I'm too old, and I'm like, dude, I don't know if you know this, but you're Rachel Hunter, the supermodel. She goes, great, calendar's still open, when?
Yeah.
I said, how about right now? She goes, what are you talking about? You don't have a crew, you don't have any hair, makeup, wardrobe. I just walked my dog, I'm in sweats, and I have no makeup on. I said, good. I just started a project that doesn't allow for any of that shit. And she said, what is it? I said, austere black and white, 2 takes. Don't take your eyes off the center of the lens. She goes, cool, what's it called? And I go, Confessional. And it just came to me. Wow. And what I left out from the first girl was after the take, she goes, I think I could do something. I could be even more authentic and more vulnerable if I got naked. So I'm like, all right, get naked, but don't show me anything. Let's do an implied nude. Otherwise, I'll never be able to share it on the internet. No one will ever see it.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you could do an art show. And I'm like, just don't show me anything. So we did another take, and that was great. So then my rule was going to be like, I only care about the portraits, but if somebody wants to do a nude or an implied nude, I'll leave it out there, no pressure. Because I'm not a guy who shoots nudes. I never was. So I started offering it, and surprisingly, more women than not, almost everybody took me up on that one. Until one day I'm at a photography show at the Leica Gallery on Beverly. And I run into Jared Land, who's the president of Red Cinema. He goes, I like those weird black and white films you're doing. What are you shooting those with? And I said, my Canon. And I'd only done a few. He goes, what are you using that piece of shit for? I'm like, dude, I don't have $65,000 for one of your cameras, or I would use them. And he goes, swing by my office. I go, what do you mean, Jared? He goes, swing by my office. So I'm like, all right. So I swing by his office, and he's got a desk full of Red cameras. And I'm like, it's like Christmas morning.
Yeah.
He's like, try one of these. And I'm like, okay, like, for how long? He's like, try it for a few days. Let me know if you like it. I'm like, I'm gonna like it. When do you need it back? He goes, just try it for a few days. Let me know what you think of it. So I'm like, dope. So I'm a polite, gracious person, so I cram like 3 confessionals into 3 days.
Yeah.
I think I did more. I think I did some in the morning and some at night. I'm just trying to shoot as much as I can while I have this precious camera. And I call him back 3 days later. I'm like, okay, it's been 3 days. Do you want the camera back? And he goes, no. And I'm like, how long can I keep it for? He's like, dude, stop bothering me. I'm busy. You think I forgot that I loaned you a camera? Just shoot it. Enjoy it. I'll let you know if I need it back.
Yeah.
I have it for like, now it's been like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. I'm like, do you need the camera back? He's like, no! So they've been incredibly supportive. Red has been ultimately it's not about sharpness, it's about the performance.
Yeah.
But now when I have the exhibition for Confessional, I can show them at a very grand scale, and it's quite beautiful. So I've done, as I said, I think 119 women, the whole spectrum of human frailty. I've shot from 11 years old to 91 years old, and the 91-year-old, as it turns out, was the only person who knew the music going in.
Oh, yeah.
Because she was married to Miles Davis in 1957 in Paris when they recorded it.
No way.
And she was the world's first black ballerina, and her name was Frances Davis, and she's also on the cover of Miles's record, Someday My Prince Will Come, which is my second favorite Miles record.
Cool.
And she was great. And I've shot, a bit of everybody. I have celebrities and civilians and young and old and people from a size 0 to a size 29, born-again Christian virgins. I have porn stars. I have Tiffany Trump and Marla Maples who both asked me to be in it.
Nice. And is there it started as sort of spontaneously.
I thought I was going to do 10 just as an experiment, and I found I couldn't stop. And
so where is it going now?
Well, yeah, you don't know me very well, but I get bored of things very easily.
Okay.
Like, if I'm shooting an ad campaign, by the second or third day, I'm just like, all right, enough of this shit. I need to do something else. For some reason, I don't get bored of these, and I can't stop shooting them, because humans, and this is humans at their most base, are fascinating to me. So, like, now I've done so many. So the plan is to do an immersive experience. So beginning in LA. So we've got an aggregate social following of about 42 million people now. L'Officiel magazine, which is like famous French fashion magazine, they've offered or asked me if I wanted to be their first full motion cover, and I would shoot in that 9:12 magazine aspect ratio with an A-list celebrity, which will take us to over 100 million people. So the plan is to do these immersive experiences that look like a church, but a secular church, like stained glass, and then Red's going to build these confessional booths where every guest that comes to the experience can sit for a 1-minute version of it, like take their makeup off with wipes, sit, and then they'll get an MP4 file sent to them of their 60-minute take that they can share. Yeah. So the plan is to do this in, 15 cities around the world. Beginning in LA, I've got a patron who donated me an amazing space. It's a 4,000 square foot black box on Pico, and it's perfect. It's got parking for 300 cars. It's got insurance. It's got a liquor license. So working on getting that funded, finding a brand or a patron or both to do this experience, and then just to take it on the road. And since there's no language barrier, it can show everywhere. And I'll continue to shoot them of different cultures and different places that I go and do this medicine show. So
I love it.
There'll be that. There'll be photographs and posters and things to buy. So that's the plan. And then I've talked to a few documentarians. So maybe it's a doc or a docuseries as well. So yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's just amazing to kind of see how that evolves and just sort of let stuff happen.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a lot of kissing frogs. Like, everyone's like, I really love this. I don't know what to do with it.
Right.
But it scares me a little bit because some people are naked.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's never really been done before. So I just got to keep kissing frogs till I find the right one who says, I get it, go. You can see some teasers, not full-length ones. I haven't released any of those, but you can see some of the teasers for Confessional on Instagram at Scott Nathan Editions.
Cool.
And my commercial work is at Scott Nathan Photo.
Man, I can listen to you tell stories all day.
That was really fun. Thank you. How long?
Well, I
have
got
you
to
been
ask
doing
you. Yeah, they're going to kick us out of here.
this? Okay.
But I got to ask you a couple. I have a little lightning round before I let you go.
All right.
That I got to know about. What's your favorite city to travel to?
My favorite city's Rome. Rome is just one of those places you feel like is the birthplace. You feel like you're in the birthplace of civilization because you are.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful, and there's art everywhere, and the food's great. And Italians are sensualists like I am. You know
Sure.
that they know the most important thing in life is not making a payment on your luxury car. It's food, wine, sex, sleep, art. Take a 2-hour lunch, take the summers off. And I'm like, the Italians and I get each other.
That's incredible.
Next.
What's the last great book you read?
It's called, I'm going to get the title wrong, but it's called The Secret Language of Trees. Do you know about this book?
Oh, that sounds familiar. I haven't read it.
It was written by this arborist, like in the Black Forest, and it's not my kind of book. Someone's like, check it out. I'm like, I don't want to read about trees. And I read like 2 pages of it, and I like stayed up all night, and then I stayed up all the next night.
Really?
It basically just unlocks the mystery of how trees talk to each other. Like if a species of tree is getting eaten by a particular type of beetle, it can secrete a terrible tasting poison to stop the beetle from eating it, which is interesting enough. But what it will do is in like 100-mile radius, it will tell every other tree of the same species to start secreting that same stuff. And
Incredible.
they'll cut down a tree and there'll be a stump, and then all the trees around it see that one of their brothers is injured, and they start pumping glucose into the roots of this tree stump trying to keep it alive.
Really?
And the forest knows not to grow to the point that it doesn't let any light in. That'll stop, and they'll leave holes in the canopy to let light in to survive itself. So like you don't never think of a forest as a living, breathing, sentient organism, but it totally is, and it's a really fascinating book.
Now I'm going to read this book. That sounds amazing.
Get it. I'll give you a money-back guarantee. If you don't love it, I'll buy it back from you.
I mean, I think it's one of those things, though, that just shows how little we understand. You know, we're so set on having all the answers,
100%.
but there's so much that we just don't understand about our world. That's cool.
And I can always reread Hemingway. I love his
Yeah.
travel logs.
Yeah. What movie have you seen the most in your life?
Lawrence of Arabia. Greatest film ever made. Every single frame you could hang on, you'd hang on your wall as a piece of art.
Sure.
And I met O'Toole once, but I'll let you save that. You can read the story. I've actually posted it.
Okay, cool. Or we'll come back to that next time you're here. Tell me one decision that changed your life forever.
God, so many. I feel like every decision in a way changes your life forever because
Okay.
it changes the course of things.
Yeah? That's fair.
I think when I just accepted the fact that I was a creative, because coming from Chicago, you know, you'd maybe meet the odd weirdo, but everybody was, you know, an investment banker or a commodities trader or an entrepreneur or a lawyer or a doctor. Like everybody are professionals. Nobody, you know, the arts are very looked down upon.
Sure. Yeah.
So when I was just like, yeah, I'm not one of you. I'm one of these people out here
Yeah.
that you mock, that you call the land of fruit and nuts. I'm a fruit and nut.
Complete this sentence. I don't have talent. I have blank.
One word answer.
Could be 6 paragraphs.
I don't know, when people say why photography, and I said, well, if I wanted to work in a vacuum alone, I would have learned how to paint. So I feel like, on one hand, if one person on my team does something bad, it all falls on me and makes me look shitty. But on the other, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, I get to take credit for all these people's work. So, you know, if I'm shooting fashion, if I get a great fashion stylist, they make me look good. If I have great hair, great makeup, a great photo assistant, lighting, I look like a genius. And I could do one painting that people don't like, but I could take 700 frames in a day, and if I have one great frame, I look like a genius. So,
That's right.
Community, I guess, is my word.
That's cool. So speaking of team, if I worked for you, what's something I would hear you say over and over?
We're not saving lives. There's no loss of blood. I don't get when people like lose their minds on a photo shoot. I'm like, why is anybody screaming at anybody? Like I once did this photo shoot. I think it was for Emmy Magazine. I shot the cover of Emmy Magazine and the cast of The Office, American Office. And everybody was pretty cool. The actors are cool, but you could feel everything's boiling over. Everybody's uptight. And the publicists, you know, look, I like celebrity publicists, some more than others,
Sure.
but they think that this is the most important thing in the world, and we're just having fun taking pictures.
Yeah.
And one publicist, it was John Krasinski's woman, just decided she hated my guts and just started trying to mutiny all the publicists after me. And I don't rattle easy. I'm just doing my job. So I'm like, Rainn Wilson, Jenna Fisher. I'm like, all right, you guys look great. I'm like, John, you look great. I like your position. Bring your chin up and 1 inch, because he was like casting a shadow from my light. And his publicist goes, this guy's a fucking idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. Put your chin back down. And I look at her and I just start laughing. She's like, what the fuck are you laughing at? I'm like, why are you yelling at me? We're just taking some pictures.
Yeah.
She's like, it might just be some pictures to you. This shit's fucking important. I'm like, nothing's important. Like, I got this gig because I know what I'm doing. And she was like, fuck you. And everyone's looking, and it's like, that's a big cast, and every one of those people had a publicist, and every one of those people had an assistant, and they're like making a spectacle out of something that does not need any spectacle. So I can be a little shitty too. So Rainn Wilson was the nicest guy in the world. We're from the same hometown. We went to the same high school. We really liked each other. No attitude. So I spent a lot of time with him, and I took some great photos of him, which ended up being the cover. I get to Krasinski, I look her in the eye, and I walk up to John and I go, click, click, click. Got it. Thanks, everybody. And he got a yearbook photo.
Oh my God.
Not totally professional. I got the job done. I got the page, but
Sure.
like, just be nice.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, sometimes it's like we're launching a rocket.
What do you mean by launching a rocket?
People take this stuff so seriously.
Yeah.
Right, as if lives are at stake.
We're just making art. We're just a bunch of kids on the floor with finger paints, I think.
Yeah. Who would you be most excited to learn appreciates you?
I don't know. This is going to sound cheesy, but like when someone who has no stake in it, like when someone who has nothing to do with anything we do says they really like my work, and I'm like, they really like my work. You know?
Yeah. That's so cool.
I guess, you know, ultimately you have to make it for you. If you start playing to the bleachers and trying to anticipate what people want, you'll always do your worst work, I think. I think if you have to get out of your depth a little bit, out of your comfort zone. And if you're really uncomfortable, I think you're just about there.
Nice.
You know, it's like playing a sport. If you play tennis with someone that you can destroy, you will never get better. If you can play against someone who can kick your ass, you're going to step up pretty quick.
Yeah.
A little humiliation, a little exhaustion, a little embarrassment, but then you'll rise up.
Sure. That's great.
Anyway, thank you so much for having this.
Wise
It's a lot
words.
of fun. You're
love
easy to
it.
talk to.
Thanks, man. That was so much fun.
All right.
Yo, that was Rebel Radio featuring Scott Nathan. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I love those stories. Make sure you check out Scott online on Medium. Check out Confessional, all that stuff. Leave us a review on iTunes or hit us with a comment on Twitter or Facebook. We're at Rebel Radio Net. You can also check out videos from a lot of our episodes on YouTube at Rebel Radio Net. Most importantly, come back next week for more Rebel Radio. Peace.